Okay, everybody, we have breaking news this morning. There is an ongoing court hearing that we are going to discuss. I have the latest information on this that literally just popped up about 2 minutes ago from people who are actually listening in on the court hearing. But we're going to talk about it because it appears that the Trump administration has directly violated the court order of Judge Brian Murphy of the District Court for the District of Massachusetts by putting 12 migrants on a plane to South Sudan without adequate notice or due process. For those who don't know, South Sudan is the youngest democracy in Africa. It only became a democracy in 2011 and is in the middle of a civil war. None of the migrants that are on this plane are originally from South Sudan. In fact, from what we have been able to glean, the details are still a little bit fuzzy. They are mostly South Asian immigrants. So this entire situation is extremely dire and emergent, and I'm going to share a little bit more about it just in a couple of minutes. But first things first, I'm wearing a cream-colored top today with a black blazer over top. My hair is pulled back in a ponytail. I'm a pink-skinned, green-eyed, dirty, blonde-haired woman, and I'm coming to you, as always, from occupied Muncie, Lenape, and Mohican land. Okay, so many of you will recall that there is an existing court order. There's actually a bunch now, but there is an existing court order from the District Court of the District of Massachusetts that says that the Trump administration is not allowed under any circumstances to extraordinarily render, because this is not deportation. Deportation is when you return someone to their home country, to extraordinarily render anyone to a third-party country without due process. Late last night, the plaintiffs in the case that resulted in this order ran into court with an emergency filing saying that they were on notice that a group of immigrants in Texas had been told that they were going to be boarded onto a plane for South Sudan. There was a hearing last night. That hearing was then reset for this morning. Flight trackers on Blue Sky, thank the gods for these people who do this in their spare time, tracked the plane from Texas to a fueling stop in Ireland, where phone calls were directly made to the airport claiming that the flight, actually stating the fact that the flight was in violation of a United States court order, at which point the plane promptly took off again. It crossed the Middle East on a flight path that originally was thought to not be headed for South Sudan, but then it buckled back. And now, just within the last 2 minutes, the Department of Justice advised Judge Brian Murphy in the first minutes of this hearing before the line went silent that the plane had in fact landed in South Sudan. Now, one thing that has to be made clear about this is that there is an argument to be made from Judge Brian Murphy's prior order that unless they release the migrants in South Sudan, as long as they keep them in the custody of the United States, they are not technically in violation of the order. But I will just say something about this. The fact that a plane even took off from Texas, headed to South Sudan with immigrants who are not from that country as a means of rendering those people directly into a civil war-torn nation seems to me to be about as direct a violation of the court's order as one can get. The other thing I would just want to mention here that's really unusual that came to light late last night while, again, these flight trackers on Blue Sky were in their spare time tracking the plane is that this plane is registered to the U.S. government, just so there's no dispute about what's going on here. The plane is registered to the U.S. government, and it is the same plane that brought Brittany Griner home from Russia. So there's literally no question that this is a plane that is in the custody of the Department of Homeland Security and has apparently flown from the Southern District of Texas all the way to South Sudan in Africa in the last about 18 hours. So this situation is really dire. And again, the hearing right now, the emergency hearing is ongoing about whether or not this is in contempt of Judge Brian Murphy's order. And late last night, in the initial part of this hearing, the DOJ claimed that they couldn't say anything about this plane because it was classified, which seems to now be their argument whenever they're asked for information that would be evidence of their violation of court orders. However, it's hard to see how this could be classified when literally civilian flight trackers are tracking this plane halfway around the planet. So again, this morning, there's been an indication from the DOJ's attorney that there's secrecy concerns involved. They claimed in the first few minutes of this hearing that this plane has child molesters and murderers on it. There's no proof of that. Very clear that these people were not given due process before they were loaded onto this plane. So we have no idea whether that's a lie or whether it's factual. We certainly don't have any indications of a criminal record here. By the way, those criminal records would presumably be public, so there wouldn't be any secrecy concern about that. And so from where we sit right now, this is one of the most overt challenges to the district court's orders trying to stop Trump from executing on this incredibly illegal and immoral scheme to deport people to third-party countries, to extraordinarily render them to places where they don't speak the language, they are not from, they were not born, and in this instance, which is an incredibly violent, war-torn country, where God knows what will happen to these people if they're released from U.S. custody. So it's very, very dire. And in the meantime, while all of this was going on, multiple other quote unquote deportation flights, extraordinary rendition flights, left Texas for places like Guantanamo Bay, El Salvador, and Guatemala. I will just say that there is so much blood on the hands of this administration, it's kind of hard to fathom. I woke up this morning at 4:30 a.m. Don't ask me why. It's like Trump too. It probably has something to do with that. And I was tracking all of this as it was happening in real time while I was trying to do my meditation practice. Probably not the wisest thing. But I had a moment this morning where I truly couldn't fathom what it takes to be the kind of people who will take individuals who most likely came to the United States to create a better life and stick them on a plane to an entire continent that they are not from, to drop them into a war-torn country with no resources, no money, no ability to speak the language, no ability to find a way out. I mean, it's literally a death sentence. And they're doing it without any moral compunction about whether or not it's justified, right? Whether or not they're doing the right thing. This morning, the assistant press secretary for the Department of Homeland Security, at least I think that's who she was, gave this insane press conference about the idea that the courts were stopping the Trump administration from keeping Americans safe. I mean, I'm sorry. How are you possibly keeping Americans safe by taking people who are living inside the United States without any due process and dumping them in the middle of a civil war on a continent that is so far removed from where they were born that they will literally never be able to find a way back with no resources, no language, and no money? It is obscenely amoral. And I know I'm ranting and I'm preaching to the choir this morning, but it's very hard to not get just absolutely outraged by this. And that's on top of what they're already doing, dumping God knows who in Guantanamo, flying people to El Salvador and Guatemala and other countries without any explanation of who's on the plane and whether or not those people are actually from there. It is just, and it's happening daily, like literally overnight. Last night, there were like 5 or 6 flights. So this is something that we have to get extremely loud about. And I know the budget thing is happening. Overnight, they were holding hearings on the Hill. They had a 1 a.m. hearing about the budget because they don't want everyday Americans to be aware that they're cutting $500 million from Medicaid. I know that that is also a real crisis point, but seriously, you should be calling about this flight to South Sudan immediately, because we have to put an extraordinary amount of pressure on this administration in addition to what's happening in court. So Judge Brian Murphy, because presumably these individuals are still in U.S. custody, can order the flight turned around. Now, we all know how this went for Judge Boasberg when he tried to do this with the flight that was on its way to El Salvador. My expectation is that Marco Rubio and Kristi Noem and their goons probably don't give a good goddamn about what Judge Brian Murphy tries to do here. However, if he finds that they are in contempt, which they would be, right? They now are. I really don't think there's any legitimate argument that they're not. He can enforce contempt through anything from fines up to jail of the officials that are responsible for the act. Okay. So that could mean, arguably, putting the DHS officials who allowed this plane to take off into jail until the flight is returned or the individuals are returned to face a court of law and get their due process rights restored. Okay. That's possible. We don't know how this is going to go, right? As I said, this hearing is ongoing, literally started late, began about 10 minutes before I went on the broadcast, and then they were in a brief recess due to secrecy concerns when I hit the live button. So again, we will see what happens with all of this, but it is of deep concern that this is again something that is taking place now, and the inhumanity of it, the amorality of it. I mean, I know there's this there are these debates going on right now about like, are we in a constitutional crisis? Are we living under fascism? I'm sorry, like we're way beyond that point at this point. Like we're in the territory of like, we're going to need Nuremberg style trials when this whole thing is over. Because there's literally no question they have violated customary international law, that they have violated the standards for international human rights violations under the UN. Like it is beyond debate right now that what they are doing, by the way, arguably could also meet some definitions of genocide, because forced relocation of individuals of a given group is literally one of the definitions of genocide. So we're in a position right now where, there will be an end to this at some point, and the end of it is going to be something that's going to require exactly the kind of court proceedings that took place at the end of Nazi Germany. This is headed in the direction of being as amoral as what the Nazis did in the 30s. So we're in a place right now where I can't put any sugarcoating on it. I'm sorry about that, but I really do think you should make your calls and raise this issue. Okay. So as I mentioned, overnight, there was a series of hearings in front of the budget committees to try to get this big, beautiful budget, as Trump has referred to it, passed. Various things happened. We are currently waiting on another markup, and that markup was supposed to come at like 3 a.m. and it's still not here. In the middle of the night, a group of very concerned Medicaid recipients and family members showed up on the steps of the Capitol. Like literally there were protests happening at like 2 a.m. I know there are some people on our Patreon feed who have been asking like, how are these cuts going to break down? We don't know all the details yet, and we'll have to see what's in the final bill if and when it passes. But one of the things that people should know is that the initial proposals will result in something like at least 3 million people being kicked off of Medicaid entirely, and at least another 7 to 10 million having a lowering of benefits. Now, Forbes, as I said yesterday, did a breakdown of the various provisions in the draft bill that was out last week. Again, I have to remind everybody that one of the things about the way budgets are passed through the U.S. government is that various clauses and provisions can come and go. So we don't yet know what's going to happen with that. There was a clause that was horrific that we lost, that actually we won on last night, that the Republicans lost on, which was a clause that would have allowed, this one's fun, that would have allowed the IRS to de-designate the nonprofit status of any nonprofit in the country whenever it felt like it, which has huge implications for charities and service organizations that benefit people who are going to fall through the safety net if Medicaid is cut. Fortunately, that provision is gone. But at least the last time I checked at about 5 a.m., there was still a provision in there that would prevent federal courts from being able to enforce contempt, just like Judge Brian Murphy is trying to do right now. So various reasons to be very, very concerned about the state of this budget. Again, I really urge you all to stay on top of this. Please continue making your calls, because every single vote is going to count on this. There are some Republicans who are on the fence about cutting Medicaid. Very important to make your phone calls, no matter who your rep or your senators are, and voice your objection to these cuts, which, by the way, are only designed, they're going to add trillions of dollars of debt to the national budget, and they are going to be used only to solidify tax benefits to the super rich. So there's no reason for any of this to be happening other than codifying, again, tax cuts to the most wealthy people among us. And again, you want to talk about amoral, kicking people on Medicaid who need that healthcare to survive off of those benefits so that like billionaires don't have to pay high taxes is pretty far up there. All right. So please continue to make your calls about this particular issue. All right. We did have some unfortunate news this morning, which is that Representative Jerry Connelly has passed away. You may recall that he was in a battle to run the oversight committee with AOC back in January, at which point he had already announced that his esophageal cancer had returned. In recent weeks, he announced that he was stepping down from that role. I don't think anybody expected him to pass away this quickly. I will remind you that how his seat is filled depends on the state law of the state from which he is a representative. Ordinarily, with members of the House of Representatives, there's a special election window. So I am assuming that's what's going to happen with Jerry Connelly's seat. We have no idea who's going to take over House oversight at this point. And again, there's a lot of people out this morning making comments about gerontocracy and why older Democrats refuse to retire and yada, 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 yada. I personally had a moment where I thought they just should have put AOC in charge of the committee. This whole thing was stupid. But nonetheless, Jerry Connelly did serve the United States in a very service-oriented capacity for many, many years. And at the moment, I kind of feel like it would be bad to speak ill of the dead. So I'm not going to do that today. But I am going to say that, we now have an open Democratic seat that must be filled by a Democrat in order for us to maintain the current extremely tight margin in the House that gives us some advantages, because truly, we only have to flip a couple of Republicans in order to defeat what the GOP is trying to do. So critically important to keep your eyes on that one. All right. Yesterday, this is a word of warning again. There was an enormous amount of news coverage about Elon Musk stepping away from government and potentially announcing that he wasn't going to make any more political contributions. And I just have to say something, because, CNN just bought this hook, line, and sinker, blasted out that Elon Musk was stepping away from government. I will believe this when I see it. Now, I will remind you all that as a special advisor to the president, his term is supposed to expire this month. There is a 120-day limit on how long special advisors to the president can serve without being confirmed. So it was already kind of known that, at least if they were going to follow this law, that Elon Musk was going to be out of government sometime in May. The thing that I will tell you, though, is that, again, you all have seen this. This administration doesn't really care at all about norms or the law or standard operating procedure. And so how Elon Musk functions in relation to government, going forward, is yet to be seen. And also, I just want to point out that apparently some of his Doge boys are staying behind. And furthermore, he claimed 2 years ago that he wasn't going to make any donations to any political candidates. And then he ended up propping up Trump's campaign in the final months before the 2024 election. So you kind of can't trust anything that the guy says. And my ongoing theme this week, which I just, have to remind you all of, as Rachel Maddow has said, and I said yesterday, and as we have to keep a really close eye on with regard to our Democratic electeds, watch what they do, not what they say. One of the big problems we have right now with mainstream media is that they are regurgitating these things that come out of the Trump administration as if they are fact. And in many instances, they're not. And in many instances, they're not even intended to walk close to the truth. So we have to be very, very careful about believing what they're saying as opposed to what they're doing, right? And again, I just have to remind everyone that, there are very deep indications that, the agenda that Musk was endeavoring to put into place was not just about his random willy-nilly Twitter-style slash and burn campaign on the federal government, but also about his own corruption. Because now we have to have conversations about this alleged Golden Dome thing that Starlink's going to apparently get a contract to build that'll be worth $25 billion if it actually comes to pass. And I have to say, there's a lot to be said about the inability of that to work. The idea of a golden dome over the entire United States as compared to the dome that, which is the military defense system over Israel, which is not very big, is a whole discussion that we can have at another point. But the grift is an enormous part of what Elon Musk has been doing this for. And that doesn't show any signs of stopping at any time soon. Okay. So we've got to be really, really cautious about taking them at their word on everything. All right. I personally am really disgusted with CNN right now for a variety of reasons. That's only one. All right. And, just one other thing that I want to mention here, which I didn't mention yesterday, there is something just deeply, deeply wrong with a media ecosystem that in this environment, at this moment, is invested in having a discussion about whether or not President Biden was too old in the final months of his term, right? I mean, as opposed to what we're all living through right now. That is irrelevant. It's a distraction. It doesn't matter. And because one of their prime reporters wrote an urgent book about it, they're spending tons of time covering it when we're literally living through, a mass deportation fascist moment that, and like the potential cutting of like 13 million Americans off of Medicaid and all these other things. Kristi Noem not being able to actually like correctly identify what habeas corpus is, and the shitty, unbelievably bad performance of a number of Trump officials yesterday on the Hill, including Marco Rubio. You know, all of these would be front page stories if we had a functioning media. And we don't. We don't. So let me wind up by saying one other thing here, which is that yesterday there was a story that got an enormous amount of news coverage about the Democratic consultant class allegedly making this plan to find the left-leaning Joe Rogan. All right. This has been widely mocked, by the way, by a whole ton of people who do what I do. And one of the things that I just want to say about this is that we already have a left-leaning ecosystem in media. This is like part of the problem with where we are, right? Some people have larger profiles, some people have smaller profiles, but there's an enormous amount of progressive commentators like myself and with much more significant platforms than I have out here doing this like literally every day. And if the Democrats want to support people like me or people like, you know, Mehdi Hassan, who has an incredible platform on Substack that he's built, or people like Joy Reid, who lost her show, right? Or even people who are kind of like lesser level commentators who are not backed up by like, you know, or are not white men. Like this is a really big deal for me because we all know where this is going if the Democrats decide to do this. They're going to fund white men and they're not going to fund anybody else. If you're concerned about this, if you think that like they're, you know, if the Democrats even think that this is an issue, they should be supporting creators who are already doing the work, right? They should be encouraging people to subscribe and pay for the service of the work of people who are already here doing it, right? They should be driving subscription content, not just to people like me, but to people like Mehdi and to people like Joy and to other folks who are out there writing about this stuff and talking about this stuff and broadcasting about this stuff every day. One of the things that's in that plan, by the way, which kind of like raised some hairs on my neck, was the idea of funding production. And one of the things that people just need to know about this is that people with enormous platforms, right? Individuals who have like, let's say 4 million followers on YouTube already have production teams because they can afford to do it, right? When I sit here every day, you know what I have? I have a camera right in front of me that is linked to my laptop, and I'm streaming all of this myself with no help and no editors, right? If they want us to be able to do like quality level production, they should be driving subscriptions to people who are doing it already. And they don't need to look very far for this, right? I mean, one of the things that I thought about last night while everyone was mocking this, like the idea that a left-leaning Joe Rogan would somehow save us, was about the fact that, you know, the universe in which we all walk is like relatively tight, right? Like I have like Anand Giridharadas' email, not that I'm going to share it with you guys, right? I've like had DMs with Joy Reid. Like we know each other. We all know each other, even just in passing. That was one of the things that was really good about what Twitter was up to, right? You could find people and you could talk to them through DMs. There's already networks that are being built of content creators on the left who are supporting one another. Chorus is one of them. I happen to be kind of like in that realm. Like I'm not officially a part of it, but I'm, you know, on the platform where Chorus is being built. Okay. That's the one that's like founded by Brian Tyler Cohen and a couple of others. These things are already happening and percolating. So we don't need there to be some like, you know, competition style selection process for the next Joe Rogan. What we need is money. And this is one of the things that like just really bothers me about this is that like lower level content creators can have bigger platforms with higher quality production if we just have more subscribers, right? Like that's really what it comes down to. And so I'm confused by what the Democrats are doing on this front. And I know some of you get upset when I challenge the Democrats, but I'm just going to say, like, we want better leadership. We want a better media system. We want to be able to control the narrative. You've got to amplify people who are already running it, right? We don't need like the magic. This is yet again another savior complex, the magic of the one individual who will doubtless be a white man who's supposed to swoop in and speak all the progressive talking points. Plus, I'm just going to say this. The donor class of the Democratic Party has a problem sometimes with people who speak out on progressive issues, right? There are people who get really like edgy when people talk about Palestine. There are people who get really, really edgy when you talk about things like trans rights, right? There are people who get really, really edgy when you say like, you know, actually like, people should be able to identify consistent with their own gender identity. I don't know why people are freaked out about this, but they are. So one of the things that is also a huge question in this effort is like, are the voices that are actually speaking out for marginalized people going to get amplified? Or are they going to pay people who are like left-leaning light, maybe aren't quite so challenging to the status quo, maybe are like not so invested in truth-telling about like the true state of the country? Huge question marks behind that, right? But one of the things that I just have to say here is that this work is not easy. And I don't talk about this ever on here, but this kind of like brought me to this point today, right? Like I've been here doing this work now for 8.5 years. And the broadcast has survived purely on Patreon subscriptions. That's it. And I pay a team through that, right? Like I'm not getting rich off of any of this. It's hard work. And it requires me to be kind of immersed in the news cycle, basically 24/7 to be able to propel it. I would love to have a following of like 4 million people that allowed me to buy huge homes and have like a production team and be able to fly to Washington, D.C. and interview people, but I don't. Okay. And part of that is because like even still people like to listen to white men more than they like to listen to women or people of color. So one of the things I just want everybody to consider when you hear talking points like this is that the right people are already here doing the work, right? Danielle Moody is out there doing the work, right? She's another content creator who's doing great stuff. And she's a woman of color, right? There are people out here with smaller platforms who are doing fantastic things to change the media narrative on behalf of the left and the liberal classes. And, you know, all we need is support. So I'm kind of like, you know, clearly a little agitated about that for a variety of reasons. But I'm going to be particularly agitated about it if all that donor money goes only to another white man. Because, you know, like, that in and of itself shows a bias about what the Democrats should be doing right now and who they should be amplifying and what positions actually matter. Okay, that's it. I'm done ranting. But it felt important to talk about that today too. Okay. All right. Lots of love to all of you. Please, if you like what we're doing here, please consider becoming a paid subscriber at patreon.com/resistancelive. You can also click join here on YouTube if you want to join the live chat. You get other perks there like emojis and stuff like that. It's kind of cool. You can do that too. And, you know, that also helps to support this work financially. But please, regardless, thumbs up this broadcast, subscribe to this channel, and share it with somebody who would benefit from what we're doing here, okay? Because the way that the platform grows is by the algorithm recognizing that there's interest in what we're building here. That, by the way, can also be achieved by dropping me a comment if you're watching on the replay. All right. Lots of love to all of you. Let's see what's happening in this court hearing in Massachusetts, because I have a feeling Judge Murphy is not going to be pleased. And we will catch you all here tomorrow at regular time. Quick note for our Patreon subscribers. There will not be a bonus broadcast, a progressive coffee hour this Friday, because it's Memorial Day weekend and my kids are off school. So no progressive coffee hour this Friday. And we will return on Tuesday with our regularly scheduled time. We do have an educational video dropping on Monday about stealth activism. I think you guys are going to like that one a lot. All right. I will catch you all here tomorrow at regular time. Thanks, everyone. Hang in there. Bye.